Okay, so I have shown you how to render in layers. By layers, I mean like, so we rendered into like shadow layer, and then like every individual one of those objects in different layers. So you see that in some layers there are other objects, but just one single object gets rendered. And we composited them on top of each other in Nuke. I'm going to show you another approach that can be used in combination with layer rendering, and that's rendering in different passes. Any rendering engine, so like here we have Redshift. Redshift has that AOV. Arnold also has its AOVs as well. So what are them? I just go and use Redshift for now. So those are different passes. A pass is a layer that contains some information about, let's say, about diffusion or global illumination or Z-depth, which is one of the mostly used rendering passes. So if you want to create a nice Z-depth in post-production, then you just like add the Z-depth here. So let's render this scene with a couple of passes instead of a couple of layers. What I'm gonna do, I'm gonna save scene this scene as a new scene, lighting tutorial, rendering passes. So I'm gonna delete these layers. So we just have one default layer that all the objects are in one object. And you see that we are rendering in EXR. Make sure you always render with OpenEXR, which is a format that can carry very complex information and metadata with itself. So I'm going to turn on the global illumination. So the global illumination, you know that any rendering engine, you can have the light rays bounces a couple of times to get a better rendering and better lighting result at the end. So let me show you with and without global illumination what would happen. So I'm going to turn off the global illumination and render it. Camera. Okay, this is the shot without global illumination, which is very usable. That's why you don't need to turn global illumination most of the times. But sometimes to enhance, especially if you have lots of interaction, light interaction inside your scene, if your scene is a closed environment like a room, you need the light to bounce again and again and again. So there are like different algorithms to calculate global illumination. Usually, well, most of the time I just start with irradiance cache, and then I use brute force. If you want to know what are them, just go read. They're just like calculation algorithms to calculate how the light is bounced and how the bounces of the light on the objects should be calculated and rendered. We don't need to get into that detail. So just like try and optimize setting and use it for different situations. So I'm going to render that with global illumination. So you see that the way it starts rendering is different. It just like does a bunch of point calculations and then get it done. Okay, so as you can see, with global illumination, it takes 39 seconds. Without, it takes 21. So what is the difference? As you can see, in the one with global illumination, the shadows are richer. The light has bounced a couple of times and it has reached to the like very dark areas. So like in this room, you can see what is under the desk, even though there is no light source directly hitting what's under the disk, but the light bounces again and again until it reaches in the very corner of like when you just like go underneath and just look around, you can still see all the details under your disk because the light has bounced millions of times. But so when we do global illumination, we actually just like let the light bounces a couple of times, and the number of times that the light will bounce is controlled here. So you saw that I used irradiance, cache, and brute force. So let's say in brute force, number of rays, the light is bounced 16 times. So until we get like this richer shadow. Okay, so that's the global illumination. I just said that because I want to use it. I want to use like a bunch of the AOVs or passes. So I want to use diffuse lighting, which is like the actual beauty pass or the color information. And then I'm going to use the global illumination because the global illumination is on. So if you just look at the rendering options in GI is on, global illumination is on. I'm going to use the, let's say, so one of these objects is very reflective, so I use the reflection map. One of them is refractive because it's made of glass, so I use the refractive pass. Maybe use your shadow pass, and also I use a specular lighting. A specular lighting are all those like tiny lights on your object. I added as well. So one of our object has subsurface scattering. So you see that I have used a variety of different materials. So they, when I render them, they have all these different qualities. So I'm going to add Z depth as well, which is called depth in Redshift. It's added. The only thing that I do, and you will see why, is just when the Z depth is added, I click here and I make that as a, you see that the depth mode is just Z, and I just turn it into Z normalized. This is very important because all the Z depth channels, they have they go from 0 to 10,000. And that's the max distance of the camera. So you see that if I select this camera is from near clip plane from 0 to 10,000. That's the distance that this camera covers. So the rendering, the Z depth is adjusted based on that distance. So this is, you see that starts from Z to 10,000. But when I use it in Nuke or After Effects, it's much easier if I have it mapped between 0 and 1. So then it's easier to be used. So now I have all the passes added. So they are getting rendered separately. But I just tick this multi-part EXR, or just let it get. I just want to let it render for now, just one frame. So we will see how it will look like. So you see that the naming is like now beauty pass. So all the passes will get rendered separately. I'm gonna render it now. Render, batch render. So one single frame is getting rendered now. It starts. Yeah, the rendering just started. You can see here that Yes, it's rendering now. Okay, the rendering is done, one single frame. I'm gonna go to the project folder, which is inside Maya projects, lighting tutorial, and inside images, you will see that we have this this scene with different names. So Buddha, and you have this diffuse light, GI, reflections. So let me show you like that. Refractions, shadows. So you can bring them separately into Nuke, all of them. So this is Nuke. You can grab all of them and just bring them into Nuke. And we use shuffle. Just want to see if, yeah, okay. So this is like all of them together like that, as it was. We use a tool that is called shuffle if all of them are added in one single file, and you can find it here, but they are rendered separately. So we just have to add them on top of each other. So we start from diffuse. So you can see that this is the diffuse light. So two of them, so I press, two of them doesn't have any diffusion, like the one with subsurface scattering and the glass one. So then you start plus, you just type plus and just adding them on top of each other. So diffuse, maybe you add diffuse in the back and then GI on top of that. So you see that so this is without GI and this is with GI. It has an interactive light with the objects that surrounds it. So then maybe you add like let's say reflection on top. Gonna move them around. So the reflection on top, I just selected and type plus, and it just like from the background is that one. So this one has lots of reflections. So you see that it just comes over there. Maybe you add then subsurface scattering. So we see that one on the corner. So I add another plus. And this one with subsurface scattering is added now. Maybe you add a specular lighting on top of all of that, or oh, this one was refraction, the glass one. So yeah, so this one is refraction and this one is reflection, because this one had lots of reflection. So I add the refraction. I like to have the reflection on top of the refraction, so I just like bring the refraction behind that. You can press M and merge and then select plus. So it's pretty much the same, and just add it. So you see that starts from diffusion, and on top of that it's GI, global illumination. On top of those two is refraction, and then there's reflection, and then there is subsurface scattering, and then you can add a specular color. Okay, you see that without specularity, with. So what's the point of light? So we reached to where we were. So we have shadow pass as well. I'm gonna bring the background. Where was the background? Source. background. So that's the background. I'm gonna add that to the background. They don't have a proper alpha channel, because that's why they use their own alpha channel. That's why I'm gonna use the actual scene to create an alpha channel. So this one before, so look at that one. That one has a proper, oh, it has all the alpha channel comes with the, what about this one? Does it have the alpha channel? No. I'm gonna bring in the one that we rendered last time. Was it? Oh, it's with the. So what I want a proper alpha channel that like cuts this surrounding and put it on top of the background. At the moment there's no alpha channel. How I figured out that there's no alpha channel on them, when I select them and I press A, it's just like nothing. So if I would have one frame with alpha channel, so we can generate it in Maya as a layer easily, very quickly. So you can go into layers and just call it like a mask layer, and so you add all of your objects into that mask layer. So we call that mask layer, and then you create a collection, you bring them in, objects, so you add them here, and then you go and do a material, create material override. So you can add a material which, like, basically you can add just a simple a very simple surface shader, like this surface shader. Just add that and drag and drop it, middle click, drag and drop it here, and then when you are here on this scene, you can see that it's nothing but just like a very simple shader that shows where the object is, and I use it as the alpha channel. So you see that there's nothing here, but the alpha channel is there. So I just call it as a mask. You can render it, you can when you add this surface, you can turn them white, so when you render it it basically gives you that white in the RGB as well. You don't need to have the GI on for rendering that one. So I save that as, so when you render in layers, that mask gets rendered automatically as a mask. So you see that I have that mask as well here. So I use the alpha, so this is the mask. I use that as I type copy. So the alpha channel comes from what? So let's, okay, you see that it's added now. So the alpha, so basically this copy, what this copy node does, it just brings the alpha channel from this mask and the color data from here and combine them. So the color data comes from here, the alpha data, which is the transparency information, comes from here. So when they are combined, we have a proper alpha channel around them. But the point is, we need the shadow path, which I brought here. So you can add that on top of the background, but you have to plus it. plus. So the shadow path is like this. Or we can multiply the shadow path to everything on top of everything. So 1, we can have, oh, where's the shadow path? I deleted that. Okay, we can bring the shadow path here, press M, and multiply the shadow path to everything. But the shadow path is white, so the multiplication becomes weird. So we just have to invert it, and then it works fine. So you see, without with. So the shadow is just like kind of added. You can. What's the beauty of like having all this together is that you can start adjusting them individually. Let's say you want to focus and work on their specularity on this golden one. You don't like that much of a specularity. So you can just go and select the specular lighting, press G, add a grade, and then start play with like multiplication or just like the gamma or the intensity of that one. You can make it, just select that. Oh, it's why it's over? It should be. Should be plus. Okay. So, or you can just like play around with the transparency. So this is without any specularity, and then I add some specularity. So you see that or let's say you want to play around with this subsurface scattering. You had just a little time to render your project, so you used just like a low sampling subsurface scattering. So you denoise it here, denoise. So we have to move this denoise box onto the object. So you see that the denoise algorithm in Nuke works very fine. So like without with. So it has been denoised. Or you can start play around with that. Like you don't like the color of the subsurface scattering. So you change the color of the subsurface scattering, but it doesn't affect anyone else. So see, just that individual object gets adjusted. So having all the passes rendered and just combined gives you a lot of flexibility in the compositing phase. So let's say I'm going to briefly talk about z-depth as well. So this is the z-depth. When you press A1 and want to watch it, and there's nothing. I'm going to hold Alt and click everything. So close. Because the z-depth is another channel. It's not RGB, it's not alpha. So if I press A in Nuke here, I don't see anything as well. But if I go and say I'm going to watch the z-depth and then press A and start to see what's there, you see that, wow, there's some information over there. So the further back the character, those statues, the whiter they get. So I go back to RGB and I use a shuffle. And using this shuffle, I say, okay, show me z-depth. Z-depth, and you can start playing around with the z-depth. You can add a grade node, and just using this white and black for multiplication. depth. Yeah. So what I did, I just converted the Z depth channel to an RGB, and then now I can just like use multiplication or other things like play around with these ones to extract more of the information in the channel. So you can use this to add camera or like blur or lens blur. Yeah, let's say call it blur. And then use that. So you see that when I blur everything, everything gets blurred. But you can use this as a mask. So I use that for depth of field. The point is, at the moment, the Z depth, the surrounding is empty. So what you see in the Z depth is these whites get affected first. So what you can do, you can combine that with a constant black here. So you can add that on top of, or maybe after this. And that black should be 1080. Press of the alpha. For the alpha, I use another thing. I use yeah, we can I just don't want to make it too confused. We can use that mask for the alpha, let's say. So I just use that mask here. And I multiply that mask, with the with this shuffle. And then if you see here, I just see the surrounding, and if this is like too jaggy around, you just like can use different like things. Now I just have, if I go back to 1 here, I just have this blurriness applied on based on. I'm gonna make them much whiter. G and make it much whiter. Okay. So these just gets applied on them. So the Z depth works on just the objects. Okay, so that's the rendering in passes.